Hi, everyone. Good evening. Oh, I love it's the teacher in me that loves like a call and response. I'm going to do a good evening, and then you get to do a good evening. Oh, it's beautiful. We haven't had a good call and respond for almost 2 years, so this is quite nice. It is good to see everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I feel super lucky to be here tonight to do what we at Ivy Street ask young people to do every single day, which is to listen, to engage, to make meaning, and of course to open our hearts and our minds for learning, to be curious and to be vulnerable. My name is Brandon Cardet-Hernandez. I'm the executive director at Ivy Street. We're one of 3 divisions at MAB Community Services, an organization that is committed to accelerating equity, access, and belonging for people with disabilities. We started in 1903 with Helen Keller serving on our advisory board. Today, our scope and our commitment to people with disabilities, it's grown, but our belief that everyone deserves access to the tools, to the supports that will allow them to realize their individual dreams, their goals, and their greatness, that remains the same. We specialize in individualized rehabilitation, family and community-focused strategies so that we can partner and help facilitate the skill building and the structural supports that honor and celebrates who each individual is. All of us deserve agency over our lives. All of us deserve a network of people, a community, charged with helping us realize the vision that we have for ourselves. And at Ivy Street, where I am honored to be the executive director, we support neurodivergent youth through a person-centered model that is driven by collaboration, a willingness to think big, and a commitment to knowing kids well. Across our educational programs, our residential program, our community-based program Skills for Life, we support adolescents and young adults with disabilities by creating the therapeutic conditions that allow them to heal, to learn, to dream big, and to thrive. And we don't do for kids, but we do it with them. We don't ask them to fit in our box, but we adapt and we adjust so that we can fit in theirs. And so when we do all of that together, we can honor who they are, what success looks and feels like, and then shoulder to shoulder, we can create the systems and the structures and the routines that will help them realize success. And I don't need to tell you that in order to do this work well, we need partners. We need industry partners who are willing to generate vocational opportunities for our young people. We need financial partners who are going to invest in our innovations. We need families as partners, families committed to allowing their young person to experience success and failure. We need partners willing to deepen our learning so that we can continue to refine our approach and do better by the communities we serve. And we have been incredibly lucky to have some wonderful partners. In a moment, I will get to introduce Dr. Paula Johnson, one of our partners, a parent at Ivy Street, and a critical ally in this work. Tonight, she will lead us in remembering John Pratt, a man of great character and great accomplishment. And after his death, a group of his friends and family came forward to create an annual lecture that would add to his legacy, a lecture that would promote the work of Ivy Street, a lecture by the most outstanding thinkers and researchers in the field that would shape and deepen our practice, a place where he was also a board member, a lecture like the one you're here for tonight, featuring Dr.Grandin, one of the most prominent voices in activism and advocacy for the autistic community. And getting to hear from Dr. Grandin, it's a gift that will improve our collective work towards our mission for serving neurodivergent youth. And this is exactly the vision that John Pratt's family and his friends held for his legacy. John's wife, Suzanne Pratt, worked tirelessly to make this lecture series a reality. And I am delighted to report that the Suzanne and John Pratt Lecture Series is now fully endowed and will be a memorial to these 2 remarkable people forever. And I want to thank all who contributed to this effort, particularly a few folks: Susan Whitehead, Ralph Mueller, John Isaacson, the Pratt family, Jenny Netzer, Ellis Seidman, Mike Widmer, John Salvati, and Charlie Stover. They were all there from the beginning. And of course, I want to thank our board, the incredible team at Ivy Street, our dedicated partners at Boston University, and our CEO, Barbara Salisbury. Each of you shows an astonishing commitment to big ideas, to the hard work and passion it takes to serve communities that too often do not receive our collective commitment and support. But most importantly, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, for being learners, your commitment to advancing access and opportunity for neurodivergent youth by deepening our thinking, our know-how, and strengthening our collective responsibility in the process. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome the wildly impressive and kind Dr. Paula Johnson, a brilliant researcher, a champion for women's health, the president of Wellesley College, and of course, an Ivy Street parent.
Good evening. I guess can't tell you how wonderful it is to be here, and it's a great honor to give this short tribute to John Pratt. I just want to share, I first met John in the early 1990s when we served together on the board of Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, and John chaired the board. And what was clear was his deep commitment to the mission of Planned Parenthood, reproductive freedom and access to all reproductive health care. Today, we would call this reproductive justice. And although I didn't know it at the time, this deep dedication to healthcare access and justice was a theme in John's life, including access to evidence-based care and services informed by the powerful combination of science and humanity. He was a principled man who believed that we needed to put resources towards the fundamental well-being of every single person. John lived this ethic. He had important roles in government, rising to welfare commissioner in Massachusetts, and he played a pivotal role, as we know, employee number one at the beginning of the Whitehead Institute, a research institute focused on improving health by bringing together brilliant people to conduct basic research unconstrained by the usual boundaries. The Whitehead has made major contributions in molecular science and genetics, including the largest contribution to the Human Genome Project. When I first worked with John almost 30 years ago, I had not had either of my children and was beginning my career in academic medicine. And it was long after his premature death in 2012 that our lives crossed again through the Ivy Street School, where our daughter Kate is a student. Now, it didn't surprise me when I learned that John had served on the board for many years and was invested in the mission of Ivy Street to provide the skills and healing for neurodivergent youth to thrive. The Ivy Street School achieves this mission through a lens of disability justice. It fits so perfectly with all that John believed, that we have to commit to justice by ensuring that all people, no matter their challenges, no matter the barriers erected to access to services, no matter their type of neurodiversity, have the right to a life of dignity and purpose. After so many struggles, our family was fortunate enough to find the Ivy Street School, which provides a deeply therapeutic environment that brings established and emerging science to educating and nurturing neurodiverse students with a range of diagnoses. Many of us with children at Ivy Street came in desperation, not knowing what the future would bring for our children. Now, while we still may not know what the future holds, and let's face it, in fact, none of us do, we know today that we are not alone. We know that a group of committed and brilliant professionals is dedicated to traveling our complicated journeys with us. And we know that our students will be better prepared for what will be complex lives, and they will have a much greater chance of that life of dignity and purpose because of the Ivy Street School. So we are all so grateful for all that John gave us and for what he taught us. And John would have been so proud to have Dr. Temple Grandin give tonight's lecture in his name. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mariah Carr, and I am a graduate of the Ivy Street School. We are here to celebrate Dr. Temple Grandin, and I am honored to introduce her to you tonight. Dr. Grandin is a scientist and industrial designer. She has done revolutionary work on cattle farms and advocating for the more humane treatment of livestock. She is also an autism activist. As a person with autism, she has shared her perspective and helped shift how many people think about autism. She has provided a narrative that centers people with autism and positions them as experts of their own experiences. Dr. Grandin has provided important perspectives for teachers on best practices for teaching children with autism in schools, and parents on providing experiences and expectations that allow their children with autism to thrive. Dr. Grandin has authored more than a dozen books about autism, as well as 400 articles on animal behavior. She has appeared on several national TV shows and was featured in an Emmy Award-winning movie about her life. She has been inducted into the American Academy for Arts and Sciences and the National Women's Hall of Fame, and was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. As a woman with autism, I have found Dr. Temple Grandin's advocacy to be inspirational. Her story is our story. Before tonight's event, I had the pleasure of viewing the HBO film about Dr. Grandin. Throughout the movie, what struck me was her fierce determination. Despite confusion and isolation in the phenomenon of experiencing the world differently than neurotypicals, Temple Grandin persevered. She did not give up. With strength and encouragement, she learned to advocate for herself and ultimately for all of us with autism. Her advocacy for the autistic community has influenced the fields of education, psychology, sociology, and numerous others. Her work has inspired me to become an advocate for myself and my community. Temple Grandin has shown the world that people with autism are not less than neurotypicals. They just think differently. In fact, autism in some ways is a gift because it opens up new doors to new perspectives. People with autism can often see things in ways that others cannot, and that can create huge breakthroughs in the arts and sciences. My mother and I play the game Wordle daily. The two of us, each thinking so differently, each bringing a different perspective, are unbeatable. We always, or almost always, win. She plots and analyzes, I look and see. We with autism have so much to contribute. I know this to be true, and I am so grateful for Dr. Grandin for sharing this perspective with the world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's great to be here. Hopefully my slides are going to work. Good, they do. I always worry about logistics. Weather was miserable going to the airport this morning. 50 miles. You know, we got summer one day, and I didn't think to look at the weather report we were going to have winter for the drive to the airport. We got there just before it got completely horrid. Well, this is my book to get kids out doing things. One of the big problems I'm seeing now with a lot of kids that get a label, because I travel all around the country, is getting too overprotected. They aren't getting out doing things. Now, I was very lucky. Actually, I was taken to Bronson Crothers at the Boston Children's Hospital, and she referred my mother to a little speech therapy school that 2 teachers taught out of their house. And what I have found is good teachers have the knack. What I have observed over the years, working with real little kids, good teachers do the same things regardless of what the name of the program is. They just know just how much to intrude. Now, here's a little kid finding out how the water drains off the roof of our building. It's a nice clean roof. People get worried about, dirt. It's not dirty. It's our brand new building. And kids just don't do enough of these things. Just getting out and just seeing how stuff works. And he was 2.5 years old. Dad was facilitating and having an absolutely great time with something that's just totally mundane. Now, the thing I want to get you thinking about is what would happen to some of yesterday's great innovators, even some of today's great innovators that are on the autism spectrum now, or they're just different. What would happen to them today? I get very worried because what I'm seeing on the fully verbal end of the autism spectrum is there's a path to play video games in the basement or to get out and have a life. No. They're not getting great jobs in the video game industry. I wish they were. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. Now, I have a lot of grandparents come up to me. In fact, I had a couple come up tonight, come up to me and say, well, I'm pretty sure I'm on the spectrum. And that's what the Different Not Less book is about. 18 adults diagnosed later in life that discover they're autistic. Now, where that's helpful is with their relationships. But I'm seeing too many kids, especially on the fully verbal end, where the label's holding them back. They're not learning basic skills like shopping. There's a lot of parents that won't let go for their kids to learn the most basic stuff. Now, this is one of my most important slides because I do a lot of talks to businesses and I use these same slides. And I want to emphasize that diversity of how people think is really, really important if you want to get things innovative done in a corporation. I'm what's called an object visualizer. HBO movie shows exactly how I think. I can't do algebra. I'm very concerned that if I grew up, for example, in the state of California, went to the public school system, I wouldn't be able to graduate from high school because I simply can't do algebra. Can't. But I know this big math universities here, you need us visual thinkers. You need us people that think visually. They form a type of engineering I call clever engineering department. We're going to hear more about that later. Then you have your mathematician thinker who thinks in patterns. Patterns, not pictures. I think in photorealistic pictures. And I've written about this in the Autistic Brain book. Also got a new book, and you can pre-order on Amazon, called Visual Thinking. And I'm going deep into this science. If you want to look this stuff up, you got to use object visualizer keyword, spatial visualizer keyword. And they're actually sort of opposite skills. And I have found in all my work that I've done in the cattle industry that in building a factory, for example, running a factory, you've got to have both the object visualizers and the mathematicians. You need them both. Then you have the verbal facts person. This is the guy that knows everything about movies or everything about baseball players, something where they just absolutely love facts. And then you've got a lot of people that are mixtures. So when I do this talk at a big corporation, they say, what's the first thing that I got to know? The first thing you got to know is that different people think differently. I didn't think other people thought in words. I didn't know that. I didn't discover that other people thought in words until I was in my late 30s. And that was kind of a shock to me. A really, really big shock. Now, verbal thinkers tend to be very top-down. So you have a big, broad concept like social justice. That's not how my mind works. My mind's going to be very specific. Okay, something specific with social justice, using DNA testing to prove it that a prisoner did not do a crime. Okay, that is something specific. You see, it's bottom-up thinking. So I don't go with big, vague concepts. Okay, what are some specific examples of doing something that would be social justice? And something I could actually do. You know, it's a lot of people have a lot of big ideas. They don't actually do it. And what you're doing with your Ivy School program is getting these kids out, learning how to do things. Bottom up versus top down. Computers do it too. Computers that diagnose melanoma use bottom up thinking. So how'd you train that artificial intelligence system? Well, you showed it 2,000 melanomas. Then you showed it 2,000 mosquito bites, pimples, and everything else. And it learns how to sort. Bottom up thinking. Concepts are formed with specific examples. Okay, so how did I learn when I was a little kid that a dog wasn't a cat? Well, in our neighborhood, which actually was in Dedham, Massachusetts, we had mostly big dogs. So dogs were bigger than cats. But then when our neighbor got a dachshund, well, I couldn't use size anymore to sort a dog from a cat. So what features does a dachshund have that she shares with a dog? Barking, nose shape, and the smell. These are features that are the same. It's bottom-up, putting things into categories. But to be good at bottom-up thinking, you got to put a lot of data into the database. I kind of almost didn't think I could think that well until I got in my 40s, when I had enough things I could search in my mind with my own built-in Google. Now let's look at some of the different kinds of minds that got us to the moon. It's now over 50 years ago. And I have been to lots of NASA places, lots and lots and lots of them. I've done lots of talks with big corporations and disability stuff. And I get a real problem with grouping people in wheelchairs together with someone with autism. They need totally different things. I like the can-do attitude. I watched the Paralympics the other night, the slalom skiing. That was absolutely wonderful. That was an example of can-do. But one bad thing I've seen in some corporations is they're making a disability silo inside the corporation. In other words, for me, my primary identity is scientist, designer, animal behavior specialist. My identity is my career. And I think getting people into interesting careers is just so important, because some of the most fun stuff, friends who shared interests. I had a great flight last night. I had the most fun flight. I sat next to a lady who's been construction manager. We did 2 hours of concrete form, snap ties, house forms, tilt-up concrete. It is just so important to talk about concrete forming systems. And that's what we did. But that's an example of a shared interest. And when I was in high school and I got bullied and teased, the only places I was not bullied and teased was shared interests. Horses, model rockets, and electronics. Friends through shared interests. Now, the right stuff rode the rocket, but the misfits in the special ed department build the stuff. I am saying that absolutely seriously. That launch pad was finished up about 4 years ago. I went in that launch pad, and the guy who was head of the project has Tourette's syndrome. I think launch pad designer is more important than the Tourette's syndrome. I'm seeing too many people becoming their label. Also, I'm going to tell you why you mathematicians and you verbal thinkers need us that can't do algebra. Engineers calculate risk. I can see risk. I found something in that launch pad that shouldn't be there. And I did not need to be an expert on launch pads. I'm not. We walked under there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I watched a raccoon come down the stairs and waddle off into bushes. He'd overnighted inside the launch pad base. And then we went up in there. There's equipment in there, and I'm going, ooh, chewing the wires. There's things in there that I don't really want a raccoon around. I was the only one who saw the raccoon come out of the base and go down the stairs. Nobody else saw him. Now let's look at some mathematician expertise. Now it's pretty disgusting that I did not know about Katherine Johnson until I saw the movie. I didn't know she existed. Horribly discriminated against. But there was one thing done right with Katherine Johnson. Her childhood math education was moved ahead. That was done right. And one of the big fights I get into with a lot of teachers, they say the verbal teachers want them to show their work and their math. That's not how these kids think. Move them ahead. The third grader can do high school math, let them do it. They're not all the same. And her math education was done right. And then Hal Laning, he worked at MIT. Very little known about him. Messy office. That sounds familiar. I have a messy office. And algebra was play for Hal Laning. And he admits, other people did all the work, but he did equations that enabled the primitive computer, the 60-pound carry-on bag that was the size of the computer, to not have a nervous breakdown when the lunar lander landed. They would have either had to have aborted the mission or it would have crashed without his algebra. Again, mission critical. All of this stuff came out on the 50th anniversary. Sort of like what really went on. All right, visual thinking department. It is the Playtex living spacesuit. I am serious. They won the bid. It was sewn by the finest bra seamstresses in the industry. And the designer was a former TV repairman without an engineering degree. And he was able to design a suit that'd be flexible and the astronaut wouldn't be spread-eagled when it was pressurized. That's the visual thinking side of engineering. Okay, let's look at the meticulous hand wiring on the Mars rover cameras. They're up there right now. And you can see they're not very big. There's a pocket knife next to them. They're not very big. I mean, somebody worked on those on a workbench. That stuff doesn't get enough credit. And if you look at the Mars rover and also the Chinese rover, there's hand-done wiring all over them. I had educators say, well, how do you know it's hand-done? I go, these are one-of-a-kind machines. You think they had a robot in there wiring that? I said, I don't think so. Absolutely not. And there's some of the pictures it took. My grandfather, right here in Cambridge, the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes, MIT trained engineer. He lived at 983 Memorial Drive, right there in Harvard Yard. I'd go visit him. And he worked with another guy named Haig Andronikian, who came up with this goofy idea for 3 little coils for an autopilot. Andronikian was autistic. My mother's written about it in her book. You see, he came up with this goofy idea. Everybody else was trying to connect the airplane's controls to the magnetic compass. What do you think the plane did? Would have been like that. And they tinkered and tinkered in a loft in Springfield, Massachusetts, that was over a garage where they fixed trains. They finally got it to work. They were lousy business people. It got ripped off. And their invention was the flux valve. The flux gate is the ripoff. They're the same thing. There's the flux valve, but if you look up the history of autopilots, you'll also hear about the flux gate. That's my grandfather's patent right there. And it was the ripoff was in every plane during World War II. And I know MIT has his papers. Let's get them up online so I can access them. Let's get them online. I was able to find out they were in the library, but I had to physically go there. Let's get them up online. Let's do that for grandfather. We need to be doing that. MIT trained engineer. So here is the mathematician working with the weird visual thinking guy. And they invented the autopilot for airplanes. Totally new idea. And then in the 70s, I had a chance to go visit the Sperry Company. The reason he was able to live in that nice apartment is because after the war was over, Sperry gave him a decent contract. So he got to live out his life in a beautiful apartment overlooking the Charles River. And we'd go there for Sunday dinner. And I'd sit in the study, and grandfather would explain to me why the tides go in and out, why the sky is blue, why is grass green, how do planes fly. I would ask him all these science questions, and he liked answering them. Well, maybe he was a little bit on the spectrum, too. Now, let's look at some other greats. What would happen to Michelangelo today? Dropped out of school at age 12. Filthy, dirty little slob, too. And this is something that is a problem for some people on the spectrum. You know, you can't be a filthy, dirty slob. There's a scene in the movie where they slam down a deodorant, and, you got to clean it up. And he also was a cheeky little guy, and he went and borrowed some pen and ink art, and then he copied it, and he gave the owner back the copy and got away with it. Thought that was funny. Okay, so here's this guy this kid, dirty little kid, but he's going around every church and looking at great art they were commissioning. See, that's exposure. And he grew up with stone cutting tools. That's exposure. I've looked into the backgrounds of a lot of really famous people who had great careers. And lots of times you have exposure at a young age and then mentoring later on. Steve Jobs bullied in school, but he had this next door neighbor's garage full of electronics. It's back to exposure. Einstein, no speech until age 3. He'd land in an autism program today. What would happen to him today? Now you get out away from the medical mecca and the intellectual mecca here, the intellectual center. You get kids just going into an autism program because it's one program where they get payments for it. The insurance will cover it. But that's what would happen to them. Thomas Edison, high school dropout, probably had autism. The other big problem I'm seeing now is so many kids are not learning working skills. When I was 13, mother got me a sewing job. I was cleaning 9 horse stalls as a teenager. A lot of these autistic kids and some of these other kids, they need 2 real jobs in the summer before they graduate from high school. So you have a slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. Okay, schools need to be keeping all of these classes. Can't emphasize it enough. When I was in elementary school, I went to the Dedham Country Day School. I had art, sewing, and woodworking. Hated cooking class. But I was the second girl in my school to take woodworking. Loved it. I tried to play musical instruments. That didn't work very well for me, but we had them. How's a kid going to find out he likes musical instruments if they're never exposed to them? Theater. That's something else that can lead to a career. And I worked with people out in designing big factories and building stuff where single welding class just completely saved them. Now they own great big metal fabrication shops, 20 patents, selling their stuff all around the world. They're just as autistic as they can be. I've worked with them. Now, how do you figure out what kind of a thinker a kid is? Well, when a kid gets around 3rd grade or so, the visual thinkers, they like art, they love building things, and the visual thinking mind also likes mechanical. Mechanical, I call it the clever engineering department. Think packaging equipment that's very, very clever. And then mathematics, building things, computer programming, music. So if you have a robotics program, my kind of mind is going to make the robot, and the programmer is going to program it. Now, I've been looking at some stuff where people are automating things with robotic arms. There's 2 ways you can do this. You want to do something in a food factory. You can copy how a person does it. That's not the way to do it. Or you come up with a different tool that you put on the robotic arm that does it better, but not the way a person does it. I've seen people do it both ways. My kind of mind will make the unique tool on the end of the robotic arm, where somebody else will just take the regular tool people use and stick it on the robotic arm, and that doesn't work as well. And your verbal thinkers, they love facts. Jobs. My kind of mind, graphic design. Also, I need to put photography in here. I have worked with a lot of camera people that were dyslexic, ADHD, autistic. They've been in TV studios, movie crews. Also skilled trades. High-end skilled trades. Somebody's got to keep all the stuff running here. Keep the power plant operating. That's not going to be the Ph.D. in engineering, I'll tell you that right now. Keep the lights on. And what's happening is my kind of mind, since I can't do algebra, in some states we're just getting screened out. But you need us, and you need us really badly. And we just now have up on Amazon and the other websites, Barnes & Noble too, got a new book you can pre-order, Visual Thinking, Temple Grandin and Betsy Lerner. Keywords, Temple Grandin, Visual Thinking, where I'm going more into this stuff because the visual thinkers can't graduate from high school. I still can't do algebra. Never could do algebra. So how do you get through college? Well, I flunked the SAT in math. And then Franklin Pierce College, right up here in Ringe, was a little tiny startup school that had 476 students, and it was only 2 years old, and Mother pounded open the back door. And fortunately, the freshman math class wasn't algebra. It was matrices, probability, and statistics. Ton of tutoring. I got through it. Statistics wobbled through with a C as in Charlie, with tons and tons and tons of tutoring. But I still can't do algebra. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so your math thinker is going to be a chemist, physicist, computer programmers. And then your verbal thinker, they're often really good at specialized retail. Selling cars has been very successful. And then the visual thinkers like me that are addicted to video games, there's been 3 successful wean-offs with car mechanics. And not just doing oil changes, serious car mechanics, where you're taking engines apart and rebuilding them. A Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. That's another reason for keeping these classes. Now, when you're weird, how did I do my business? Well, we want to get these kids doing the entrepreneur stuff. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows Elon Musk is autistic. And when I read Ashley Vance's book, I think it was about 10 years ago now, I was pretty sure he was autistic, but I couldn't say it. But he came out on Saturday Night Live just about a year ago that he was autistic. And his identity is all about his rockets and his cars. He just had a giant full-color spread second business page in the Wall Street Journal of the houses he'd sold. Big fancy mansions, and that stuff's not important to him. He went and bought a Boxable, a really weird little prefabricated house, and he's got that at his spaceport. Now, I can really relate to that. I can also relate that he, at one time, had the house that the actor that played Willy Wonka. He sold that to one of Wilder's relatives and said, don't change that house, it would wreck its soul. Because that's Willy Wonka's house. Well, that's kind of what he's done. Willy Wonka of rockets. You see, I relate to that because I am what I do. So I started out with a little sign painting business in high school. We've got to work on this entrepreneur stuff. And the first sign I ever made was for a hair salon. And I had to make a sign that a hair salon would want, so I put the Breck lady on it. And the way I sold jobs is I simply showed people a portfolio of my work. Now there's a drawing, dipping vat drawing, that's from one of the projects in the 70s. And I would show people my work. Now it's so easy, you can just have it on your phone. Because you never know where you're going to find the person to show the work. And I figured out people that could open doors, and I figured that out very early on. And there's a scene in the movie where I get the editor's card. Because I knew if I wrote for that magazine, that would really, really help my career writing for the farm magazine. Now that's the drawing I sent to Mr. Fielding of Cargill back in the late 80s. 30-second wow. I gave him that drawing, some pictures. Now why did I put in there, you have to touch to perceive? I watched the industry in the 90s go from hand drafting to computers. And we started getting strange mistakes on drawings. Things like the center of the circle was not in the center of the circle. And the person who had drawn that had never drawn by hand, and they'd never built anything. Yeah. And that's one of the pictures that got sent to Mr. Fielding. Basically, I sent him a portfolio of work, but don't put too much junk in it. Kind of a 30-second wow. And that's the full-scale working replica they built for the movie. I love the fact that the movie did that. There's my brochure I was using in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. Had to be black and white pictures. Color printing was too expensive back then. When I tell students now about 4-color process, they can't believe it. I said they had to go through the printing press 4 times to make colored pictures. So I sent them the brochure. No mention of autism. Just showed the work off. In fact, when I started out in the 70s, being a woman was a gigantic barrier. Autism was a non-issue. I never talked about it. I just showed the work. And that's another one of the jobs in the 1983 project for a beef packing plant. And that was in the packet of stuff. And there's the original black and white project from the mid-70s. Now, who builds large food processing plants? After really thinking about the object visualizer and the math visualizer, the people I worked with that owned big metal fabrication shops never worked on refrigeration of boilers. That required more mathematical MIT-type engineers, degreed engineers. Most of the people I worked with had barely graduated from high school. They started out with a little tiny shop, and then many of them morphed into great big huge shops, selling things all around the world. I know a guy who stutters, ADHD, dyslexic, flunking out of school, one welding class, started making stuff. He is selling things all around the world now. Problem is, he's my age. They're all retiring. They're not getting replaced because Junior, who's to replace them, is playing video games in the basement and getting a disability check. You see, there's a relationship here. We need the clever engineering department. You know, the MIT engineer is only half of it. You need the other half of the engineering department. Then they're getting shunted into special ed. 20% of the people I worked with when we were out in big Cargill plants, Tyson plants, out in these really, really big plants, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, all undiagnosed. Own shops ranging from large to small, multiple patents, designing and building complicated equipment. I've done lots of engineering. I was very careful not to use the title. I always wrote livestock handling consultant. I know people that lay out entire factories, design factories, yes, draftsmen, don't get paid very well, and they're designing entire factories. Been there, done that. I've worked for all the meat companies. They're all the same, all works the same way. Now, that's a picture I took in 2019 of a brand new pork processing plant. Every piece of equipment on that floor is imported. We're not making it anymore. And then if you want to get a new poultry processing plant, you're going to have to bring the equipment over here from Holland in 100 shipping containers. It's getting pretty expensive now. Containers on the spot market at about $16,000 for a 40-footer right now. You know, and I happen to find supply chain stuff really interesting. It's the kind of stuff that interests me. Because the thing is, a brain can be more thinking and cognitive, or a brain can be more social emotional. Now, some people have said, well, everybody's on the autism spectrum. No, only half the population would be on the autism spectrum. Those are the ones that are less social, more interested in things. And a fun flight for me is talking about concrete forming systems. Oh, and every way to cheat on concrete work, we discussed that too. You know, really interesting things to talk about. But I'm very concerned that we're losing skills. Very, very concerned about this. And I went to the Steve Jobs Theater, the Apple mothership building, see those structural glass walls? They're from Italy and Germany. And the carbon fiber roof is from Dubai. We tracked down all the vendors for that. And here's the parachute for the Mars rover landing on Mars. He's taking a selfie of landing on Mars. I found the company that made the fabric. It was woven on high-tech European looms. Parachute was made here, but the fabric is from Europe. High-tech fabric. I'm very concerned about losing skills. All right, what are some tips for working with minds that are different? If I was a computer, I'd be an Intel 286. Very small processor, but I got a couple of warehouses full of computers for memory. So a very big memory, but I'm accessing it through a very small processor. So working memory is a problem. Crazy multitasking jobs need to be avoided. Super crazy takeout window, that's not where you put them. Also, any task that involves a sequence, I need a pilot's checklist. Telling me long strings of verbal information doesn't work, I can't remember it. Because I basically got no working memory. Pilot's checklist. The big problem now I'm seeing is kids getting so overprotected, they're not learning stuff, not getting out and doing things. We've got to limit the video game playing because they're not going anywhere. They're not learning to design games. Vagueness doesn't work. On one of my first projects, I criticized some welding and I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo. And that plant engineer pulled me into his office and he said I had to apologize. I just couldn't use that kind of language. What's the goal of education? Where's a student 10 years after high school? I hope they're not in jail or something like that. I hope they're out doing something constructive. I was doing those dip fat projects, that's what I was doing. Getting exercise, I do 100 sit-ups every night. Hate them, hate everyone, hate exercising, absolutely hate it. But if I do those sit-ups, then I sleep better. Work experience. The big place where we're falling down and the kids that are different is the transitioning to the world of work. And it needs to be a slow transition. We have to find replacements for paper routes, like volunteer jobs, farmer's market, church, community center, old folks home, where they're doing a task on a schedule outside the home and somebody outside the family is the boss. And when I was 13, Mother got me a little sewing job with a seamstress that worked out of her home. 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. Then I went out to my aunt's ranch. Sign painting. I was doing a little sign painting business in high school. You want to encourage all of that kind of entrepreneur stuff. And then when I was in college, Mother set me up so I could be an aide for a kid with autism in a summer program. And then I also worked one summer as an intern in a research lab. Really, really important. So by the time I graduated from college, I had a lot of working skill experience. What you don't want is a sudden transition. And I just can't believe the number of parents that can't let go when I suggest that their kids should just run in the gas station and buy something while they're filling up the car. You know, to do things that little. I had one mom start crying when I suggested her 16-year-old should buy printer paper. And I said, I wasn't too nice, I said, printer paper. Really? I want you to say, printer paper? You're afraid to let your kid buy printer paper? After that, I can't even look at a ream of printer paper now without thinking of that. And just before COVID, I was in the airport, and a mom and her 12-year-old daughter came up to me, and they said the daughter was on the spectrum. And we got to talking, and I found out that the girl had never gone shopping by herself. So I pulled $5 out of my wallet, and I said, go in that store across the hall and buy something. And she bought a drink and brought me back the change. First time she bought something by herself. Now it was across the hall. We could see the shop. This is baby steps. Back doors into jobs. Half of all good jobs are back door. We got to do a lot more things on getting people in the back door to jobs. Elementary school life skills training. Party hostess. It was done in Dedham, Massachusetts when the kids got to be about 8 years old. Put on their good clothes, greet the guests, learn how to shake hands, pass out the snacks, selling candy for charity. Again, important skills it teaches, talking to people, shopping. When I was about 8 years old, I got 50 cents for allowance. And there were certain items that Mother considered allowance items. Kites, candy, comics. 50 cents could buy 5 Superman comics, 10 candy bars. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that as a very young child. Friends through shared interests, and there's teenage activities. And then I fixed up this ugly shed, and I had to do it in a way that other people would like. That's learning work skills. I was probably 18 when I did this. And then I was also painting signs for the Arizona State Fair Carnival. For goofy exhibits, this was like the Himalayan monster. It was a dummy in a freezer chest full of ice. Totally stupid thing. Completely stupid exhibit. So how did I get that job, paint this ridiculous sign? I showed an old sign painter my portfolio that showed pictures of signs. But the skills I learned doing this helped me get my freelance business started, doing something more important, which was designing cattle handling facilities. And there's my sign painting truck. Had to learn how to drive. That's going to take longer. I did 200 miles on dirt roads before we did any traffic. You got to get the driving into motor memory. You need to go out in big deserted parking lots like Fenway Park when it's Sunday at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the kind of place that you start. Totally safe places. Go into it really slowly. Slow transition from the world of school to the world of work. I want these jobs on a schedule outside the home starting at 11 and 12. These have to be the paper route substitutes. Learning skills such as shopping. Don't overprotect and overaccommodate. And learn how to keep a real job before you graduate from high school. It's that simple. Mentors, and I had some really good mentors. I had a fabulous speech teacher. I had my mother. She knew just how hard to push me. I had my science teacher, Mr. Carlock, who gave me interesting projects, who got me motivated to study. And then there was Jim the contractor, a former Marine Corps captain starting a tiny construction company. He had seen my drawings and he seeked me out. Another very important mentor. And he helped me get my business started. I helped him get started. And then, of course, I had to, make a corporation and do all that stuff for having a business. He helped me set that up. Really important things. Mentors. When I was 8, I still didn't know how to read. Mother taught me with phonics. I can't believe the complicated nonsense they've got online for teaching phonics. Now, one of the things that really helped me is I knew my ABC song. That's half your sounds. I could sing an ABC song. So she just put the alphabet up on the wall, had me memorize the sounds like ah and a. Then you get a book worth reading, like The Wizard of Oz. And Mother would read a page and then have me stop and sound out a few words. Hour after school, about 4 days a week at the end of the semester, I went from no reading to 6th grade level reading. Wasn't that hard. And I had some very, very good mentors and teachers. Can't emphasize that enough. Now let's talk about sensory issues. I had problems with loud noise. I still have problems with itchy things against my skin. Sensory problems are real. They're very variable. They vary from annoyance to something that really holds you back. Now, one thing that can help with noise sensitivity is let the child or the adult control the dreaded noise. There was one kid that was terrified of the buzzer on the scoreboard in the gym. So they took him down there when no one was there and let him play with the button. And he started tapping out tunes on it. Or you let the kid play with the vacuum cleaner. Some other thing, they don't like the noise. Now, the problem with wearing headphones is if you wear them all the time, your ear gets more sensitive. What you want to do is have them with you, but try not to wear them. And there's a few totally awful places like industrial strength bathrooms. All these different auto flushes that are all set differently. Yeah, you wear it for that, but then get it off. But you can always have it with you to give you control. Finding soft clothing. And then there's an interesting research called Autism Environmental Enrichment. It's a paper on stimulating two senses at the same time to desensitize them. Now, what's a sign of a visual processing problem? I don't have this problem. But these are the kids that complain that the print jiggles on the page. If a kid's terrified of escalators, I guarantee he's got a visual processing problem. Most kids love escalators. Now that's making me think about our stupid outdoor escalator at our airport using an indoor escalator equipment for outdoors, and it gets expansion and contraction in the chain, and one end's going whoop, whoop, whoop. The other end sounds like a bunch of starlings. And you go in and you do an eye exam. That eye exam will be pretty much normal. That's the thing. See, these sensory things are very, very variable. Some people with very severe sensory processing problems will complain about image breakup, especially when they're tired. This is similar to migraine, kind of problems that migraine people get. Imagine if that's what your seeing was like. And then the writing may jiggle. And here are some simple things you can do for it. Try printing the homework on different pale-colored papers. And somebody might say, well, that's not evidence-based. Let me tell you, I'm going to come out of the practical world. I talk to a lot of super low-income folks. They got no services. They got nothing. I'm talking about colored paper. Cheap, safe, doesn't work. Just, you'll know in 15 minutes. If something's expensive, dangerous, or really time-consuming, yeah, I got to have evidence-based. But I know people whose careers in college have been saved by a ream of tan paper. I don't know why it works, but sometimes this makes a difference. The other big problem for certain people is flickering of LED lights. Drives them absolutely crazy. That is in the it has to be fixed list. Okay, let's look at accommodations you really need. Well, the lighting is a really bad one. And then some people need extra time on tests. Now, the ones that have the very severe sensory problems, they can't screen out background noise. I have problems hearing in noisy restaurants. They get tired in these. Also, I can't follow fast chit-chat social conversations. They go by too quickly. So then I get bored and start staring off at the TVs and stuff. Now, but sensory problems are real. And I tell parents, you've got to imagine these little kids. They're like a phone with only one bar of service. So when you want them to use their words, you've got to give them time to respond. They might need 30 seconds to respond. It's a long time. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. It's an adjunct to other methods. Evidence-based, you stimulate two senses at the same time. It's an adjunct to other therapies. There's a lot of controversy now about ABA. Well, so there's some bad ABA that ignores sensory. Also, ABA needs to be phased out. You got a fully verbal kid who's going to go to college. You don't use ABA. And some people are still doing that. That's just kind of stupid. But the thing I've observed, especially with the little kids, good teachers do the same thing regardless of what the name of the program is. And so I always ask parents of little kids, are you getting more speech? Are you getting more ability to wait and take turns at games? Another really, really important thing, and more skills like dressing, using utensils, just skills. This is a little 3 and 5-year-olds. And if you're getting that, then you're getting progress. Now, if you're working with people that remain nonverbal, I consider these books must-reads. These are written by people who type completely independently. Nobody's touching them. And I had a chance to meet Tito. And he comes in flapping all around. And I showed him this really weird picture. And I showed him a picture of an astronaut in a spacesuit on a horse in the desert. It was in an old Scientific American. And he types Apollo 11 on a horse and jumps up and runs around. There was no way that was cued. And unfortunately, Tito's book is only available electronically now, unfortunately. But it is on Amazon Kindle, and it's worth buying a Kindle just to have that book. Carly's voice, and then I like the sequel to The Reason I Jumped. The sequel's better because he's older. But if you're working with this population, I consider these books must-reads. Okay, tension-shifting slowness. I have this problem. That's why I can't follow these fast chit-chat conversations. The social people just get so much fun, but there's no content. It might be sports-themed chit-chat. Now, this shows attention-shifting slowness. This is actually some of Omni Clin's work on social with a very early eye-tracking software. Look at how many times the normal line looks back and forth. Yeah, that's attention shifting. Teaching little kids, slow down when you talk to them. When the grown-ups talked fast, it went into gibberish. Also, my speech teacher would enunciate words. She'd hold up a cup and go, cup, then she'd go, cup. Always encourage the kid to use their words, but you gotta give them time to respond. They're like that phone with one bar of service. You want a web page out of that phone, you've gotta give it time to respond. Teachable moments. That's just 50s teaching. Like if I stuck my fingers in the mashed potatoes, Mother didn't say no. She'd say use the fork. She would quietly give the instruction and teaching turn-taking. And here's some scans that show I've got a really big visual thinking circuit. There's another scan. And there's my working memories wrecked. The algebra circuits are pretty well trashed. Okay, let's look at emotions. When I went into puberty, I started having horrible problems with panic attacks. It was all biology. My fear center was 3 times bigger than normal. And I was terrified. Public speaking in airplanes. 2 things I was just terrified of. Especially that plane. That was the worst plane. And it's got a weird name. It's called a Fokker. You got to say it really carefully. It's called a Fokker. That's the name of that plane. And air traffic controllers thought it was funny to, let's say it a little differently. But when that thing put the wheels down, I was sure the belly was falling out of it. I walked out of my first talk, and then I realized I had to have really good slides. Now, the way I got over the airplane fear is you got to make them interesting. And I got to ride in the cockpit of this plane full of Holstein heifers going to Puerto Rico. And when we get back to the Miami airport, cow urine was dripping out of the bottom of the fuselage of the cow, Connie. It's a constellation. They call it the S-H-I-T, Connie. But that started making it interesting. And when I went to the cargo department of the Miami airport in the early 70s, every way to torture aircraft, and they still flew, I saw it. Oh, it's just disgusting, some of the things they did to those planes. Okay, fear, the main emotion in autism. It is now controlled with low doses of antidepressants. I have been on it since 1980. This is all I described in Thinking in Pictures. And the mistake that's made with antidepressants is too high a dose. I only take a starter dose. Big mistake doctors make, and they still make it, is too high a dose. You'll get agitation and insomnia. And then I also found sometimes my squeezing machine helped to calm me down, and I built that myself for some skilled trade stuff there. And there's a kid reacting well to pressure with an occupational therapist. Sensory stuff, that's part of a good program. Now you got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. Now one thing I loved in the movie is it showed how I think visually. That's accurate. Also, all the projects I did were accurate. And one of them was this optical illusion room. And they showed the actual movie that I saw in high school. But my science teacher wasn't going to tell me how to do it. He wanted me to figure it out for myself. Figure out how to do it. Tinker and figure out how to make it work. That's why I did my kids' books. Kids are too scared of making mistakes, learn to tinker with things. Now here's this free stuff you can get online. Penrose tiling, that's what Stephen Hawking used. And Stephen Hawking said, concentrate on those things. Your disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. Interview with the New York Times. And he could do math in his head really well and not much else. And I really liked the Paralympics, the slalom skiing. That was just amazing. You could be a paraplegic and you could do that. And science magazines. Let's get science and nature out in the high schools. You got to show kids interesting stuff. When I look at these magazines, there's a lot of mathematical kinds of physics in here I don't really understand. But then I see diagrams of stuff that are beautiful symmetrical patterns. Okay, that's for the math heads. Fractals. I show this stuff because I talked to a lot of low-income areas. I said, this stuff's all free. You can find all this stuff online. Mathematical patterns in plants. All kinds of interesting things. Educational materials, that a lot of free stuff. I find a lot of parents, they get so locked into the label, and that's why I did that book, Navigating Autism, because Deborah Moore came up with this term, label locking. They get so locked into the label, they don't think of anything else. Also, there's been discussions about person first versus identity first language. Well, my first book was Mergence labeled autistic. So I've been using that. But when it really, for me, career, it comes first. Because career's given me a really interesting life. I've been able to do some things to improve the livestock industry. That's doing something constructive in the real world. And like the flight I had when we talked about the concrete forms and problems with tilt-up construction falling over and things like that. And we were discussing that maybe the tilt-up industry, this is what they use for building warehouses, they're going to have to deal with the storms knocking walls over. We were discussing that. And I find that kind of problem solving is really super interesting. Well, we need people that do those things. Well, what I want to do right now is we got time for questions. And we're going to do questions until I'm told that, then they've got an awards program they're going to be doing after I do a few questions.
All right. I get the honor of being the guy with the mic, but you get the honor of raising your hands. So do we have a taker for our first question? Perfect.
Thank you very much. I work in the legal industry, and I'm a judge.
Okay.
And so people come before me from every walk of life. Is there a, not polite, but a pragmatic way to raise the issue that someone may actually be undiagnosed and it is having a negative impact on their social behavior?
All right, that's too vague. You see, I have to see, okay, now we're getting into a very fundamental difference here because as a lawyer,
Right.
that's a very verbal field. And I get the same problem. I was just at a veterinary conference about dog behavior questions. I have to have a lot more specific information. One of the things with people on the spectrum getting in trouble with the law, and then there'll be other kids that will kind of egg them on that do something they shouldn't be doing. Well, they need to be brought up. There's certain rules. Then you get into the problem of what rules you can break. Now, let me tell you how I figured that out in high school. I have a rule categorizing system. You don't do really bad things. Killing people, for example, is something you don't do. You don't rob banks. You don't wreck buildings. That's really bad stuff. And every society has rules about really bad things. Then you've got the courtesy rules. Those vary somewhat in different societies, like not pushing in line. If I was in the Middle East, if I stuck my foot out and showed you the bottom of my foot now, that'd be the rudest thing I possibly could do. And that's where I'd have to be coached, because I'd have no way of knowing that. Then you have illegal but not bad. All right, a little bit of speeding. A concrete contractor blocks the road to get the concrete work done. Illegal but not bad. And then you have the sins of the system. And boy, these puppies bite. And they're getting so controversial right now that I'm not even going to discuss them. But they're very, very society specific. And in some cases can get you into more trouble than murder might get you in. And they're not logical. Because some people on the spectrum have problems. Well, this guy's speeding a little bit. Or this guy at this factory doesn't have his earplug stuck in quite right. You have to. That's how I categorize rules.
Well, can I ask?
Yeah.
There's a barrier for us sometimes to raise an issue to someone if we see a pattern of behavior that we think might be something that's more not related to they're bad people, but rather that perhaps they are on the spectrum.
This is when you pull them aside in private, with no recorders on, verbal only, and you just tell them. And you do it off the record and say, hey, your kid's really headed for trouble. They might be on the spectrum. I've worked with so many skilled tradespeople that were probably on the spectrum. Computer programmers. I've been out to Silicon Valley. Half those programmers are on the spectrum. That guy's making $100,000 or more a year. And then I've worked with a guy who owns a gigantic shop, and he's on the spectrum. And then somebody else is just getting into piles of trouble. I've got to have more specifics, and then I'm pretty blunt. I've had that girl just go buy stuff in the store. We went to a nice catered dinner tonight. I was at one of those dinners, very similar. For a university president, and a couple came in with their 12-year-old autistic son, and he didn't like the catered food, so they brought in takeout, which he started eating in the most grossly disgusting manner possible, picking up in his hands, and it was not finger food. I finally lost it, and I finally said, this is a fancy catered banquet, and you are to use the utensils, and don't ever bring takeout into an event like this again. He actually used the utensils and ate some of the food. Mom turned bright green. And it was super rude what I did, but it was effective. And this is where you as a judge need to get them in your chamber, find out exactly what's going on, and just tell them, no, this is what you got to do. And that, the thing with rule breaking, that's why I made these categories of rules. Because there's some rules I can break somewhat. All right, how strict are they going to be on masks? When I'm in the airport, you wear a mask there. Other places, no, I don't have to wear it. But there's, you got to, let's take an example, okay, drug offenses, for example. Marijuana is legal in Colorado. There's some states where you can go to jail still for having pot. All right, that's an example of a sin of the system because it's different in different places. Where most civilized societies, killing people is considered wrong in just about all, civilized societies. See, those are much more general, robbing banks, things like that.
Thank you so much. All right, I see another hand over there. Do you want to grab it?
Okay.
Hi, my name's Brandy. I am a mom to 2 4, almost 5-year-old little kids. One of them is neurotypical, clearly. The other one, we're not sure. And we've been advised to maybe do like a neuropsych exam and all this other stuff.
Well, wait a minute, is he having any problems? Sometimes we get so hung up on this stuff, it's just ridiculous. Because I thought too many people came straight out of a really low-income situation, build the new Plan Edition 15 years later.
Yeah, no, not the issues. I mean, they're pre-K4, right? So
what's his problem?
Learning ABCs, identify what the difference is between letters and numbers, etc. Having social skills and like fitting in social situations, things that 4-year-olds begin to learn at this age, but they're not. That's a problem. It's not a diagnosis, and there's the suspicion of. So my 2 questions really are: A, how do you kind of identify the problem or get to the point where you say, okay, this might be autism or this might be on the spectrum and we should get this examined? And B, would a neuropsych exam help kind of direct us into how they learn and where to teach?
It depends sort of about how you do it, too. I see a lot of schools are more busy diagnosing stuff than they are trying to correct. So the kids, we have to teach turn-taking games. That was one of the things that was done in my speech therapy school. We had to learn how to wait and take turns, a little game where you like a Parcheesi board, you shake the dice and move the little pieces around the board. That was used to teach turn-taking, things like that. I had a table hockey set. Well, table hockey set's no fun unless you have another child to do it with. But okay, is the kid, let's just ask, is the kid talking normally? Okay, talking normally.
On the slower side of speaking,
but then always encourage them to use their words. And then things, how about just basic skills? Dressing, brushing the teeth, good on all of that. Turn-taking games, when I was 5, there was a lot of emphasis on that. They're a little bit young to start seeing special skills like art or math. Often that tends to show up a little bit later. But some of these kids, the teacher's going to have to encourage her to get in, to not just sit off in the corner by herself, and pull her into the group doing things. I have a book of The Way I See It that's out there. That's my book for parents of little kids. Okay.
Good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight. I have a son, and as his mom, I feel as though there isn't anything that he isn't capable of. I think.
How old a kid is this?
My son is 15, going
15,
on 16.
okay.
He's a student at the Ivy Street School, and I just think he's amazing.
Good.
Sometimes the rest of the world doesn't agree with me.
All right, what is the specific problem? Let's not talk in generalities. Where is he having a problem?
The specific problem will be when he begins to perseverate on certain topics that might be offensive to other people.
Well, I've learned certain topics we just don't talk about. And then let's look at other topics, like I was obsessed with carnival rides. And that's not offensive. Mm-hmm. But people just got bored hearing about this carnival ride over and over and over again. And you have to learn, you can tell that story twice, and then you need to go on to something else.
Right.
And certain offensive topics, we just don't talk about it.
Right. But he can make an offensive topic out of something that you would maybe think is pretty benign.
Well, we're going to have to just coach him very specifically that he should not do this. Okay, what is he? Does he have any friends through shared interests?
Shared interest.
Well, like it could be robotics, it could be art, it could be playing in the band, it could be theater, it could be a lot of different things. For me, it was horses, electronics, and model rockets.
I think he still does a lot of parallel social things.
Like what?
He loves coding. He's going to coding camp this summer.
Okay, all right.
He loves coding. Other friends that he may have are building Legos. He's very high functioning.
But let's say coding. In robotics, there's 2 parts of it. There's the coding part and the mechanical robot. I'm going to do the mechanical part. Somebody else can do the coding.
He's the coder.
All right, that's fine. But then he has to do a code that somebody else wants that will enable that robot to do something very specific, the assigned task. You always have an assigned task. Now, is he participating in that? Because that's much more like a work situation.
Yeah, so his favorite is Lewis script. And over the summer, I think he'll move on to Scratch.
Okay, he's doing Scratch. What about some JavaScript or some grown-up programming?
Right, so there's a whole list, and basically we take the courses that are being advised to us by the person who is at this coding camp. I teach
Okay,
that.
all right.
Okay.
And so you're gradually getting into more
Right.
complicated coding.
Right.
And right now the industry's hiring.
Right.
They're
so
hiring. There's a ton of jobs in there.
I thought the next step would be Python, and
Yep, that's right.
the person said, no, he's too advanced for Python. You want to go here. So I take a lot of direction that way. But I also have a very good mentor that my son and I go visit.
And now, is he getting good at coding and getting into Python and JavaScript are grown-up professional coding?
Yeah.
Is he learning how to do that?
He's very good.
Okay, good. And
very
then
good.
let's build up on that. The offensive stuff, there's certain things you just don't talk about.
Right.
You're going to have to just coach them.
Right.
That, well, we just don't talk about that stuff. There's sex, religion, and politics, you don't bring it to work. Period. Period. Don't bring it to work.
And that's a conversation we've had, that there's a time and there's a place. But what I said to my mentor was, because my mentor said, he's fascinating. I've never had a student like him, blah, blah, blah. And there isn't anything that he won't be able to do. So my son leaves the area, and I said, thank you for saying that, Tito, but will he ever be able to hold a job? And Tito said to me, yes, with very, very kind people.
Well, let's get him into a job. Just find something in the neighborhood. Some little shop or something like that, where he can just start learning some job skills and because the big problem I'm seeing is we're not making the transition into work. Mm-hmm. And I realized that mother started me with a job at 13, 2 afternoons a week with a dressmaker, and I took apart garments and hand hemmed them. And I loved the money I got from it too.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Our son is 40. And he's on the spectrum. And he continues to start conversations by asking a question. And we have
that's
tried
common,
and tried.
Yeah.
Do you have any... I'll be making pancakes in the morning, and he'll come down and he'll see me, and he'll say, are you making pancakes? And I'll say, what do you think? And he'll say, you're making pancakes. But it gets in the way of him in the work environment because it's inappropriate. It's weird. It's strange. Do you have any tips?
Yeah. Well, what is his work environment?
He hasn't been working for a couple of years because of COVID, but he was working in a small tuxedo shop, doing all the labeling and sorting and steaming and so forth. So and people there were very kind.
Well, you see,
and
the
they
thing
treated
is,
him
some kinds of quirks like that, if he's really good at what he does, then they'll tolerate that.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah, that's something that's tolerated. Where like the Tourette's people I've worked with, verbal tics drive everybody crazy. So all the Tourette's people I've worked with, they've all got mouth and eye wiggles. Can't get rid of the tics. You just move them to something that's less obnoxious. And that's all the ones, and I know quite a few of them. Robotics designer, guy that worked in a bookstore. And they got, little wiggles like that. That doesn't bother anybody. That's pretty benign. But if they're saying bad language and things like that, people aren't going to tolerate that.
Not bad language. It's just always starting a relationship or relating to somebody. It's always connecting with someone by asking a question.
And you can't. Now, what grade level does he read and write at?
He's very verbal. He's a computer wizard. He can tell you every country line dancing song in the universe. But he's very, very visual. And he can't do algebra.
No. But he can do, has he ever done anything with tools?
He loves to cook.
Then maybe he needs to work in restaurant cooking then. Maybe that's what he needs to be doing.
Yeah.
He's a good enough cook. People aren't going to care about the silly question thing. He's a good enough cook. This is where you sell the skill rather than yourself. Because the other thing I learned with my drawings, you don't show those drawings to Human Resources Department. You get them in the hands of the engineers, the people who are going to care about those drawings. You want to avoid the HR.
That was good. Dr. Grandin, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And so I'm looking. Oh, I'm doing it because your hand, it was a strong arm that went up. So it's a strong arm.
Hello, my name is Lily. I'm a former Ivy Street School student. And my question is if we could change how would you recommend to change the terminology of like when someone has a preoccupation of autism, not to say, oh, he's obsessed with that, or how would you, and like things like that, not to say, I know like what is autism when it becomes problematic.
I just say Einstein had autism, Elon Musk has got autism. That's how I respond to a lot of things. See, the problem is if you got rid of all the autism, no one's going to keep the lights on.
Yeah, so my question was like, how would you say to not call someone who has a preoccupation of autism obsessions? How would you make it like preoccupation instead of obsession? Because when people talk about autism, they say, oh, he's obsessed with that. Like, what would you like say that like some lines of like he's more preoccupied with that than obsessed? Because that sounds
I would go on and on and on, even after I got my business started, going on and on about some cattle handling thing and just work it into the ground to the point where people got bored with it. One of the things that helped on this is making myself extremely good at what I did. If you're a super good computer programmer, people will tolerate a lot of stuff. Now, a lot of offensive talk, no. But maybe just going on and on talking about, maybe about the programming, just in kind of an obsessive way, if you're good enough. What I did, and for me, being a woman was a much bigger barrier than autism was, and I never disclosed. And when I was on a project meeting, I always wanted really clear directions of what they wanted the job to do. My equipment had to do certain stuff. I could have this part of the site, like the perimeter, the boundaries of the site, things like that. So I'll do the designing, but what's the outcome of that project? The price range for it, what it had to do. And I'd get that settled at the project meeting. And making myself good at what I did. I also picked out a highly specialized field where at the time there was no competition. Highly specialized field, and it wasn't a field that changed like rapidly the way the computer industry does. The sign painting, actually, sadly, that's all done by computers now. I go to the carnival now, there wasn't a single hand-painted sign in the whole carnival. But making yourself good at a skill that other people want. Make yourself good enough at something. People will tolerate a lot of quirks. Especially if it's just something like doing a little repetitive questioning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grandin. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Which mic am I? I'm using this one. All right. We did what we set out to do. We listened, we learned, we expanded, we all grew. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who asked a question. Such great questions this evening. I'm going to move us along to a part I'm excited about. I was really lucky. I got to start my career as a special education teacher in New York City. It was some of the hardest work I've ever done. The demand was around innovation. It's to think big. It's to go small. The complexity never ceases to amaze me. It was also some of the most rewarding work. The connection, the community, the impact that you're able to have in a classroom shapes everything I do today. And of course, as a first-generation American, as a Latino man, as a gay man, I'm deeply aware of how important representation is in our classrooms and for our kids. And how important it is for kids to see different types of teachers in their classrooms. And it's in that spirit that I'm excited to announce the first ever John Pratt Teaching Fellowship Award, a scholarship aimed at building, diversifying, and strengthening the pipeline of special education teachers committed to accelerating equity and access and opportunity for kids. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kate Garrity, our Chief Learning Officer, to share more about the fellowship and announce our recipients.
Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Kate Garrity, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at Ivy Street. In the last few years and in my current role overseeing our education department, I've witnessed firsthand how the side effects of the pandemic have recalibrated the learning that happened in our school and in others across the country. Students and staff members have been asked to work and learn in the midst of an upheaval of routines and any sense of predictability. And truthfully, this has shifted priorities and goals, both personal and professional. With that being said, I think so many of us can recognize the impact a great teacher can have on a learner. Those that show their commitment and passion in the work are the ones that leave an indelible mark on a young person as they move through the world. Because of this, it felt like the most important time to look inward at Ivy Street, within the walls of the school we all share space in, and notice those in our community that were showing up each day with steadiness, with passion, and with a mindset turned towards our students' growth. With this, the John Pratt Teaching Fellowship took form. The fellowship is designed to provide an annual scholarship for teaching fellows to pursue master's degrees in education and teaching while working in our classroom spaces. We are proud to share that due to the strong applicant pool, we extended our fellowship from 2 to 3 fellows this year, and I'd like to honor each one now. Our first fellow is Namrod Gurmai, our Physical Education and Wellness Fellow. I'm going to speak a little bit about you.
You get to say
Namrod will be pursuing a master's in teaching with a licensure in physical education. What I can tell you about Namrod is he is more than a teacher, a basketball coach, a mentor. He sees our students for the young adults they are and has shown true commitment to supporting them in their growth on a much larger scale. He sees the best in our students and he wants the best for them as well. I'm pleased to present this recognition to you, Namrod. Congrats. Our next fellow is Victoria Yetman. You get to stand in the spotlight now. Tori is a teaching fellow pursuing a master's in education with a licensure in special education. Tori has been somewhat of a jack of all trades at Ivy Street and has supported students both in classrooms and at an individual level. She is quick to offer a helping hand and has shown her ability to offer consistency and stability to our students when they may need the most support. She already has the ringing endorsement from one student who exclaimed, "You're not cool," when learning about the fellowship recipients. Congratulations, Tori. Last, but certainly not least, our final fellow is Deshawn Velez. Deshawn is also a teaching fellow pursuing a master's in education with a licensure in special education. Deesh is someone who so many of our students seek out to share funny stories, spend lunchtime, and celebrate personal wins with. Our students also astutely notice his humility and calm and view him as a person they want to emulate. He is able to meet students where they are at and hold expectations they can strive for and then achieve. Please help me congratulate Deshawn on this accomplishment. Thank you to the Pratt family, Dr. Grandin, and congratulations once again to our fellows. I'm excited to start working with you.
Hi, I'm Beverly Brown. I'm a member of the board at Ivy Street School as well as involved with Boston University. This evening's event and actually a full day of activities for Dr. Grandin, ending as well in another lecture tomorrow evening at Boston University, are really part of a long-term collaboration that the Ivy Street School and Boston University have. And these collaborations actually are seeking to address the challenges that neurodiverse individuals have through research, policy, and practice. This unique partnership creates evidence-based practices in education, occupational, and speech therapy, as well as provides the education for practitioners to use at Ivy Street School as well as other similar organizations. Peer-reviewed publications guide policymakers at all levels. Thank you, Dr. Grandin, for sharing your journey and encouraging others, and all of us here tonight, all around the world, to rise to the challenge of meeting all individuals where they are, focusing on their strengths and passions. You inspire all of us to explore creative ways to engage our students, our employees, and loved ones, and to assist them on their journeys to crafting a fulfilling life. On behalf of Ivy Street School and Boston University, thank you all for coming out this evening, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.